Good evening, Montreal, and welcome to another episode of The Ball is Round. Tonight, we recap another week of CF Montreal preseason. We have some really exciting news in the form of a partnership between CONCACAF and CONMEBOL, which has implications for both our national teams. And we're seeing a changing of the guard in the role of Canadian women's national team goalkeepers as well. All that and much more on episode 117 of The Ball is Round. I'm joined by Elias Grigoriadis once again. Hi, Elias. How are you doing?
Hi, I'm not too bad. Not too bad. How about you?
Hanging in there, thank you. So we are without our fearless co-host Hady this evening as he is celebrating his son's birthday. Of course, a very, very good excuse to miss an episode, and we certainly wish a happy birthday to Nadim. Hopefully, they are enjoying their festive day despite the extremely snowy weather out there.
Yeah, it's really bad.
I know, I know, I know. I feel bad. I'm really hoping Olivier Renard doesn't sign anybody today who looks at the weather. No pressure. That being said, it's we've definitely had a really good wintry January so far, so everyone survived. Speaking of course, we definitely had some comings and goings. I think at training camp at different locations this week, and
Yeah.
probably we're going to see the same next week. dot dot dot. So let's jump right in. Elias, you were once
Yeah.
again a fixture at CF Montreal's preseason training. And you were also at yesterday's scrimmage between the first team and the U23s. But we're going to talk about the scrimmage kind of in good detail in a moment. So I just want to ask you, of course, once again, as an observer of preseason training, what have you noticed this week compared to last? Are there any players who are kind of starting to really stand out with Hernan Lozada? Is there anything tactically that's starting to come together, do you think?
Yeah, I mean, they're finally starting to. Well, the first thing that sticks out tactically is that they're finally starting to actually work on tactics, right? Kamal Miller said it, and in his media availability, the hard running and the getting back in shape portion of camp is basically done, right? They're still expected to improve shape, obviously. Nobody's in mid-season form yet, but now they're finally starting to incorporate a bit more tactical work, right? The first session of tactical work, if you will, was on Friday when they were working on very high press, but it kind of showed that this next week is when they're really starting to get the let out in terms of establishing everybody's role and kind of developing some tactical patterns. And the training, the scrimmage was a chance to try that a little bit. It was mostly just get back into the feeling of a game, right? Because there's only so much a scrimmage, a 7-on-7 scrimmage could do in terms of
Mhm.
preparing yourself for the season.
Yeah, of course. No, that's really interesting. And I know you. I know we kind of had to wait a while for Kamal Miller's immediate availability this week as well.
Yeah.
I think it was expected to be Monday, but it wound up kind of getting pushed until Friday. Any thoughts on what kind of pushed that out so much? Because of course there have been some rumors swirling around him.
Yeah, I mean, he was supposed to speak on Wednesday as well, and that's
Uh,
a lot of media was there, and then it ended up not being him, and there being Saliba and Piet, if I remember correctly. And then again, it was very nice speaking to them and kind of getting
mhm.
to ask some questions. But at the end of the day, Kamal Miller was the only player that played at the World Cup, and he was the only international that hadn't spoken to the club to the press yet. So that was a little annoying, and the fact that we were all there and we are all ready for Kamal Miller to speak, and then we kind of got Samuel Piet again, and who I always love speaking with Samuel Piet. He's super nice to talk to, but we had hyped ourselves up, and we had prepared questions for Kamal
Yeah.
Miller, so it was a bit of a disappointing moment, but we got to speak to him on Friday, so it was slightly annoying. But at the end of the day, it's no harm, no foul. We got to speak to all the Canadian nationals now, and
Mhm.
he seems happy to be back, and he's aware that his future in Montreal is relatively limited. He's probably going to be moving this year at the end, whether it be it in the summer window for Europe or at the end of the season. He's most likely not going to be playing more than just one season in Montreal again if he continues the performances and he continues to be a starter with the club. So I think that he understands that, but he seems to really enjoy being in Montreal. He enjoys, gets along really well with the players. Him and Joel Waterman are like best friends, which is really nice to see. And they probably got a lot closer in Qatar. So other than that, it's an interesting time in training. It's kind of a transitionary period, and a lot of the running seems to be over. A lot of the hard running seems to be over, and now they're kind of just maintain that shape and work in some of the more philosophical points, if you will.
Cool. No, sounds really interesting. And like you said, they've started to move a bit more into tactics. So was
Yeah.
there any kind of unique points about Lazada's tactics that you observed in training?
Uh, the press, honestly, they're going to be a team that shoves the press back down the opposition's throat. They really want to pin the opposition deep in their own third, and this is a very
Mhm.
Argentine way of looking at the press, right? You see it with Lionel Scaloni's tactics with the national team. You see it a lot in the Argentinian leagues, where this very high press and this press not just with the front line, but then you see the midfielders kind of follow this up because if they do manage to play through the forwards, they're already that much more vulnerable because of how hard the forwards press. So a lot of the hard running was to get people in shape to press that high, which is kind of a stark contrast with Nancy, who had like this delayed press. They would only press once the opposition built up to a certain point. So, if, for example, it's at the if they build out, for example, 20 or 25 or 30 meters, and then once they hit that moment, that's when everybody closes down. Rosada wants to press as high up the pitch as possible. So it's two different ways of two different philosophies on how to press opposition. I don't know which one is better. I personally prefer a team that tries to the ball back as quickly as possible. So it'll be interesting to see how Lasada can
Mhm.
kind of expand on that idea, because it does seem to be the what he wants to his forward line to do. And it
Mhm.
depends on also how he lines up. If he lines up with one forward, will the single forward's job to be direct the press, and then everybody else follows up. If it's two strikers, do they kind of want to single out one defender and then close down that way? So it'd be interesting to see the finer points and how adaptable he is. But it's very clear that everybody better be in shape, because there's going to be a lot of running.
It's going to be a high work rate. Yeah.
Yeah,
And that kind of doesn't
absolutely.
surprise me. Like you said, it is very Argentine of him. And I think looking back at some of his work with the Belgian team that he coached, because I don't think DC United is a great example, looking even back at that team, and it doesn't seem like a style that fits the Belgian league, but you can see elements of it as well when you look at the team that he coached previously. And we'll just wish quickly a good evening to Matthew. Hello, good evening. Thank you
Hey,
for joining
Matthew.
us. I am one woman tonight, kind of manning everything. So if anybody does post anything in the feed, promise I am going to keep an eye on it. But I have a lot to keep an eye on, so I'm going to do my best. Um, we had a question as well about training this week from Amin. But before we get to that, is there anything you wanted to add on your observations from training?
No, I mean, just the fact that first of all, everyone is looking in considerably better shape. They were doing the shuttle test, they're doing the beep test at the end of the week, and Mathieu Chouanier was miles ahead of everybody. He ended
Oh
up with like
wow!
a 23, which is kind of just absolutely ridiculous. Milo Garvanyan was second place, tied second place with Joel Waterman, I believe. They got 21 and a half, which is,
Oh,
very impressive all the same. But Mathieu
Joel
Chouanier,
Waterman, really?
Joel Waterman was floating the entire time. He didn't have a bead of sweat trickling off him the entire time. And then at the
Oh
end,
my
I
gosh!
guess he kind of let off. Or I don't know why he stopped running. He probably just doesn't show it as
Mhm.
much, his fatigue, but he was floating. His running form was great, and he was just looked so comfortable. And then Mathieu Chouanier obviously won out, but Milo Garvanyan, who's a draft pick, who was
Yeah.
the club's first draft pick, was very impressive. He got 21 and a half as well. So if Hernando Sada is looking for people with very high levels of fitness, Garvanyan has, you know, differentiated himself in that, or at least he's made himself known that he's in very good shape.
Awesome. No, that's really interesting. I remember the beep test from middle school, and it is not a good memory.
The worst,
So,
the worst thing.
yeah, for real. But glad to hear at least the players had a slightly better time of it than we did.
Yeah.
And yeah, we'll just quickly say hi to Chan as well. And good evening. And I do see Holy Gale's message as well about training tidbits. Hello, Holy Gale. All right, so let's quickly touch on Amin's question here. So Amin asks us, what about Hamdi's form since preseason just started, and where was he playing / practicing? Ronald just said he sees him more as a 10 than an 8. And knowing that he's earning a big salary, I'm expecting him to get every chance to impress under Lozada. And then the same question goes for Toy and Sunusi Ibrahim. I'm going to flip that one to you, Elias.
Yeah. So I mean, starting with Hamdi, especially in the scrimmage, he kind of operates in a similar role to Mr. Shwanya, where it's like an 8-10 hybrid. Um, Unfortunately for him, he played in a 3-man midfield in the second half of the scrimmage, where he played behind Sunusi and Mason Toy. So he didn't really get to show off how much of a hybrid he was. He was more stuck into that number 10 role, whereas Mr. Shwanya played in a 4-man midfield with Sean Rea, Victor Wanyama, Saliba, I believe, and Milivojevic. Although Shwanya did play out wide, he still got to, participate in that style of midfield with just one striker. So I think that Hamdi will get his fair shot at that number 10 spot. I think that it does all depend on whether or not they go with one or two attacking midfielder 10s behind one striker. Because if that's the case, then he does have a really good chance of getting a decent amount of minutes, because you do need someone to balance the ball carrying Matko Milivojevic, Sean Rea type player, and that way he can lie a bit deeper and kind of conduct play. However, if they do go with two strikers and one lone 10, they are going to need someone who can collect the ball and drive forward, be it with a line breaking pass or just carry the ball. That's something that Matko Milivojevic does very well. So I think that that's where Ahmed Hamdi might find a bit less success and a bit less play time at the 10 spot if they play with two strikers like they did last season. So it really does depend on how Hernando Sada lines up. In the scrimmage, one half had two strikers, one half had one striker. So it's very clear that he's not 100% sure on what the direction he wants to take. He really wants to see players evolve in a number of different scenarios. You're going to see it again on Friday. I assume that, this time it'll be Toy or Sunusi, who's the lone striker, and it'll be Romero Kyoto, who's part of a 2-man striker, to see how that works. But, it all depends on where he's wanted, right? Because Olivier Renard has a specific role for him. He had a specific role in mind when he brought him on. He signed him, and that is as a 10. It just depends, because if he's the only 10, it's going to have a lot of people have to do a lot of work around him in terms of progressing play. So he can pick out a pass as well as anybody else on the team. But in terms of, receiving the ball into space and then driving forward, that's going to be a different situation. That's going to be something he has to improve on, assuming he stays healthy, right? So it'll be very interesting to see his progression, to see how he fits into Hernando Sada's plans. But there's no mistaking that he's very talented, and that his versatility can find him some minutes. Even if he doesn't play at the 10, he can come on for some Pierre Victor Wanyama, especially if they're trying to win a goal and need a more offensive looking deep line playmaker. But again, it's there's still so many questions that we haven't had answered by Nano Sada in terms of tactics, which is understandable given that they started, a couple days ago. But as camp progresses and as we get reports from Florida, right, thanks to people that are going to be covering the team while they're there, we'll get a better idea. But as for now, we have very little information to go off of, aside from, one half of soccer.
Yeah, of course. No, but really interesting to see. And obviously, we really hope, I think Ahmed Hamdi can show us what he's made of. I think Hady, he's not here this evening, but he certainly, he believes that Ahmed Hamdi can offer a whole lot more than he's gotten the chance to. Just circumstances, unfortunately, haven't played out in his favor. Yeah, it's be really, really fascinating to watch as season goes on. And we'll just quickly say hi to Wilfried as well. Good. And as well, I don't think we've had a chance to talk about this a whole lot, Elias, but of course there are, as is tradition, several academy players who are participating in the preseason camp as well. So we have Jefferson Alphonse, Gabriel Antinoro, Loic Cloutier, Malik Dauda, and Mathis Hébert. Have you noticed anything out of these individuals? How are they holding up against the senior team?
Yeah, I mean, they all featured for the U23 side in the scrimmage, and it was
Hmm.
difficult, right? Because you're an under 23 team playing against an MLS team, and not just any MLS team, right? The team that last year was the third best team in the league, right? So you are going to concede a lot of possession. You are not going to have any forwards, namely John Elias, who was, who a lot of people want to know about. You don't really see much from him because, well, just the fact that they didn't get much going offensively, given the fact that it's quite literally in some situations boys against men. So
Hmm.
in that way, the forwards didn't really have as much of a chance to shine. One thing I will say is that it's very refreshing to see that there is starting to become a club identity, right? You saw that the U23s played with three defenders and two wingbacks. You saw that they wanted to keep the ball every time they won possession, even if they had, you know, football and MLS players, all stars, MVP candidates pressing them. They were stressing each other to keep possession. They pressed one of the best back lines in the league, and they did it, with a lot of success in the first half. The second half was a bit of a weird half of soccer because everyone was kind of just going on cruise control. But in the first half, Ilias Iliadis scored a goal, but it was because the midfield press won the ball from Victor Wanyama, and that's something that not even most MLS players can claim to do. So they won the ball from Victor Wanyama rightfully, and they caught Jonathan Silva out of position because Wanyama likes to play at the top of his own box
Yeah.
as a pivot, as a relay point for the back line, and he lost the ball, and it was an easy goal, right? So it was nice to see that there's this unified identity, and obviously Ilias Iliadis and uh, kind of captain that midfield and use his experience to kind of, lead the press. Malik Dawda was played right alongside him, and those two in the midfield were very impressive in ways that they managed to break up, especially in the first 15 minutes, were very successful in breaking up the build-up play from Montreal. The first, again, it could also come down to rustiness. It could come down to, maybe a lack of familiarity because there were some new players there. Sean Rea and Aaron Herrera were both on the field for that for the first half. Could come down maybe a bit to lack of familiarity. But those two in the middle of the field were exceptional in terms of breaking up the buildup of play and kind of forcing a lot of long balls over the top that are obviously much easier to defend than getting pinned back in your own end and then forcing to defend a lot of continuous sequences of possession. So that was very impressive. Jefferson Alphonse also played in the first half. He was all on the back line, and when you have to defend Matko Miljevic and Romel Kyoto, it's never easy. Romel Kyoto got a goal and two assists. Matko Miljevic got two goals, two very nice goals, and also drew the penalty. So he struggled a little bit along with Usman Jabang, who were kind of playing together in that back three, along with Louis Couture. But the three of them had some really good moments, right? And again, it really was three big mistakes that led to goals. And obviously, when you're a defender, the biggest thing that sticks out to you are your mistakes, are right. So three big mistakes is
Three
noteworthy. But there were a
goals.
lot of really
Yeah.
nice, exactly right. But there were a lot of really nice moments as well, especially from Louis Couture, who was very intelligent in the way he played. He stuck out in training in the last 2-3 weeks, during the scrimmages where he showed very good composure and he's very intelligent defensively, right? He's never in a wrong spot. And that kind of happened again today sorry, on Saturday, where he would step out of the midfield, step out of the defense into the midfield, break up play. He did that very competently. So I don't know if there's place for him in terms of an already very busy back line for CF Montreal, but in terms of what we saw in that first half, it's very strong. And so
Hmm.
I was very impressed with the U23s, and I think they came out firing. And again, that gradually subsided as experience and technical quality kind of took over the game. But their energy and their commitment to playing the right way is very refreshing.
Oh, it's really exciting. And there is
Yeah,
always the possibility, of course, that players who stand out, they could potentially be offered a contract because, as we're going to talk about
yeah,
later, we will talk a little bit later on about kind of the amount of room left on the roster and the budget, and be
yeah,
potentially loaned out, for example, to CPL once again, which we've seen has proved fruitful for several players. So no, I'm glad to see that there's a sense of continuity that's really relieving and
yeah.
long overdue.
Absolutely.
Awesome. Yeah. So let's talk as well about some other first team players who are present at training because, of course, there are some conversations that simply can't be avoided. We do have lots and lots of rumors still surrounding Kai Kamara. He was at training this week, and we saw some pictures and videos online. He seemed to be like laughing and joking, pretty cheerful and happy. Would you agree from kind of what you observed?
Yeah, I mean, James Patemis basically, confirmed it, right? In terms of his relationship with the team, nothing much has
Mhm.
changed. Obviously, the club is not thrilled with how this played out, and they wanted it to go a certain way. And there it really is just it's looking to become a relatively unharmonious divorce. It looks like, right? Because
Yeah.
Kai Kamara goes on Instagram Live, contradicts what Olivier Renal said. So now it's becoming a whole case of whose word are you taking, and it's kind of devolving into a bit of a soap opera, and it's something that's not looking good on either party, right? So Kai Kamara doesn't come out looking good, Montreal doesn't come out looking good, and it distracts from what is supposed to be kind of a welcome back party for the club in terms of what this Montreal training camp is. He didn't take any part in the Friday's tactical sessions in terms of pressing. He did not take
Hmm.
part in the scrimmage against the under 23s. He was just doing, solo work, whether it was core, whether it was just, some cardio. So it's very clear that he's not in the club's plans, which means they're going to have to
Hmm.
move him as quickly as possible because at this point he's just taking up a roster spot and, he's still being paid by the club. So it's in their best interest to move him now because it's very clear that these two sides are getting more and more separated and social media and even regular conventional media is kind of eating this up because this is
Yeah.
probably one of the bigger trade sagas that we've had in a long time in terms of it's not just Rudy Camacho over to Wanyama saying yeah I'm not going back, actually I signed, okay, and it was a very clean cut done
Yeah.
deal and it's not that much
And
drama.
like even if they had
So
left, you wouldn't have held it against them, kind of. You know what I
exactly,
mean?
exactly, right? So, they had spent a long time with the club, and it was the end of their contract, and
Yeah.
they would have left. If they would have left, it would have been harmonious, right? There would have been replacements coming in. Everything would
Yeah.
have
It would just,
kind of
yeah, it would have been like a sense
continued
of
without that.
closure.
Exactly. So that I think that's why it's getting so much attention. If he had requested the trade, gone trade like a couple days later, then whatever. It was a weird
Yeah.
moment. It was, right after Nelsie left, so it was just that entire week and a half was just chaos, and then we're done with it.
Hmm.
But he's still here, which means
Hmm.
until he's gone, it's going to be a thing.
It's
And
going to be like
it
the elephant in
really
the room.
annoys me because I am kind of sick and tired of this, right? The club has made their position known. He's made his position known. He's still going to be training. The club obviously doesn't want him to speak to the media because he hasn't been made available to speak. Um,
Hmm.
and I don't think they're going to let him speak anytime soon. So it is what it
Mm.
is. But I think that right now, until I hear an update from the club, I genuinely don't want to talk about it anymore. I'm kind of over the whole will they, won't they of this.
Fair enough. Fair enough. And, for anybody who hasn't caught up on that particular Instagram live, which is the latest news in the saga, you can certainly consult it on the player's Instagram. It's accessible there. But I think we're kind of more interested definitely in talking about kind of the soccer. And so
The, so-
the soccer, exactly,
the
more so
soccer.
than the off the pitch drama. I think we've had our fill of off the pitch drama from this team in the past
Yes,
3 years.
please God. Oh
So,
my God. Yeah,
so yeah, no, but and we have thankfully, we have no shortage of soccer related events to talk about this week. So,
absolutely.
yeah, obviously, like you said, this is kind of going to be an elephant in the room. Good to know that there's still a good relationship amongst the players and Kai
Yeah.
Kamara, which is great. Leadership, different story. But speaking of vibes and speaking of, relationships and dynamics and stuff, we got a question from Majid, which I'm also going to turn over to you. So
Yeah.
it says, already asked the question to others, but it's nice to have different points of view. Based on what you've observed so far, how's the relationship between Lozada and his players looking? Any signs of the previously advertised tyrant? Any mutiny in sight?
Um, I obviously, bit of an exaggeration there, I think, just for a spot of humor. But Kamal Miller did talk about how Losada has very strong emphasis on diet and fitness, right? So I think that his approach to it hasn't changed. I just think that, like he said at his presentation at Sonic Trile, he's learning from some mistakes that he may have committed earlier in his career. So I think he still has this passion. I still think he does hold his team to this kind of dietary and fitness standard, but he goes about it in a way that's much more digestible. If that makes a sense. If that makes any sense, he does it in a way that maybe um, feels a lot more like this is strongly how I feel instead of quote unquote tyrannical. Um, and I think that a lot of the players have benefited from it. It's a much more in shape, significantly more in shape camp than what we saw at the beginning. People at the beginning of camp, even doing some like minor cardio, they were huffing and puffing and they were doubled over and they were red in the face and they were just dripping in sweat. And now even in the beep test they had people doing really good numbers, and now even during the cardio sessions that you see them doing in the later stages of training camp, they're looking in much better shape. The pressing and the work rate, especially in the scrimmage, was very impressive. So I think that you know it, he's still getting his point across. He's still having things done his way, but I think he's learned that I have to become a bit more tactful in the way I approach it. So
Yeah.
I think that may just come with experience, right? Nobody is perfect off the rip. So I think
No.
that maybe his time in DC has become a learning experience. I think he's spoken about it with Olivier Renard and maybe his staff on how to bring bring his message across in a easier way to get the players on board, because based on the way that they're pressing and based on the way that they're reacting to this new style of press, they seem genuinely excited, which means they're welcoming the additional running that they're going to have to do every single game, and
Yeah.
that's only a positive. So far he seems to have a good relationship with the players. He seems to get his mentality and his ideals across relatively smoothly. He was joking around. I think you saw it from some of the other reporters that were at the scrimmage on Saturday. He was joking around with the players on the bench and he was having a good time. So it seems to be a very lighthearted atmosphere. I mean, it is if you're winning 3-1 and you just had a good half, but he
Mhm.
seems to get along very well with a lot of the players, which is ultimately it's the most important part. Is you could have all the best ideas in the world, but if your players aren't receptive to it, then you're banging your head against the wall. So it seems to be a much better relationship than what he had at DC.
Excellent. Yeah, I think it is largely about the delivery of the message. I think that's beyond important, and hopefully he has learned,
Yeah.
especially in this day and age when we do take mental health so seriously. Um, so let's talk about the scrimmage kind of in great detail. You really
Yeah.
definitely went into good detail on the U23 players and the academy players who featured within that team, as well as some of our trialists. But let's talk about, obviously we're going to be focusing on the first team for most of the season. So let's talk about how that went. So thanks to the power of your live tweets, bless you for
Yeah,
that.
that was fun. I haven't live tweeted in a while, so it was nice to get
It
to
was it
it's
was a
nice to do
good
that again.
fun. Appreciate it. Yeah. So we know already, of course, that the final score of the first team scrimmage against the U23 team was 3-1. And there was a Romel Kyoto penalty kick, which penalty in a scrimmage is pretty wild, but all right. And a brace from Matko Miljevic, assisted twice by Romel
Yep.
Kyoto. Um, so starting right off, let's take a look at how the first team lined up. So you had also tweeted this, so thank you for that.
Yeah.
So we had
So that was the first half lineup.
Yeah, the first half lined up. Yeah, you're correct. We're not going to talk a whole ton about the second half, just because, like you said, it was kind of the foot was off the gas a little bit more in the second half. So we'll mainly focus kind of on the first half, since that's where most of the events occurred. Um, so obviously, looking at the lineup, we did have a pretty significant mix of kind of your supposed starting 11, or who we assume would be the starting
Yeah.
11, and some of those bench and depth players. So we had Logan Ketterer. I think that's the first time he's ever suited up for the first team.
Yeah, he played a
Along
couple
with,
under 23 games, but
yeah,
this is his first time, as far as I'm concerned, that he's played with the first team.
Yeah, exactly. Same. Then we had Robert Thorkelson, Rudy Camacho, and Aaron Herrera, who took the right center back position. We had Lassie Lappalainen on left wing, Victor Wanyama, Nathan Saliba, and Mathieu Chouanière taking up the right wing back position with a double attacking midfield of Sean Rea and Mako Miljevic, who I think we all thought were kind of going to be in competition, but they were out there in conjunction with each other. And up top, we had Ramel Kyoto as the starting striker for the benefit of any of our audio listeners. So, I saw, amongst your tweets that you had one player who really kind of blew you away and really knocked your socks off and really really impressed you, and that was Aaron Herrera.
Yeah.
So what can you tell us about the game that he had?
I mean, his physical his fitness was already kind of teased by Summer Pierre, who said he was probably the most in shape and uh athletically speaking, probably the best at
Mm-hmm.
camp, and that kind of showed where he was basically spent the entire 45 minutes sprinting flat out. He played all along the back line, practically played all three center back positions at some point or another. He played right wing back when he switched with Metzer Schwanya, just because of the way the game flowed, and how they like to have their outside center backs kind of get involved in the attack almost. He was winning the ball back. He was moving. He was kind of jump starting, breaking lines, carrying the ball. So his delivery has already been spoken for, and that was probably his biggest selling point when he was brought to Montreal. And his defensive acumen wasn't maybe in doubt, but was kind of a bigger unknown, if you will, than his offensive contributions. So the fact that he really kind of kickstarted the winning the ball back, especially if it got to his side, and he covered exceptionally. Um,
Mm-hmm.
it's very refreshing to see. It's very encouraging because Alistair Johnston leaves a massive hole in the defense when he leaves. Right, he was the defensive player of the year, and for good reason. He was arguably, if not one of, if not the best on ball defender in MLS last season, and losing that is a massive shot to the defensive integrity of your back line. So the fact that you have Aaron Herrera, who can just like Alistair Johnson play at that center back position or on the wing, is a massive steal. And for the fact that, Joaquin Torres is gone, but they've basically broken even in terms of GAM. With now, it's basically just they've sent Joaquin Torres away, and they've brought in Aaron Herrera for basically the same amount of money, is an exceptional bargain, because Aaron Herrera is going to, I believe, is going to have a similar season to Elser Johnson, where he becomes a very strong contender for one of the best defenders in the league. And that was a personal goal of his. He speaking to the media, he said that my offensive qualities are known, but he wants to become that dominant defensive presence. And I think that he's well on his way to proving that, because he was standout in terms of just how well he played and winning the ball back.
Yeah. And I mean, we saw from RSL, like their fans were, and I think I've said it a few times on the show, like their fans were
Yeah,
not pleased. And, I've
yeah,
even seen some reporting just like from, kind of other areas, if you will, of MLS coverage, even saying that this is one of the signings of the season or one of the trades of the season within
yeah,
MLS. So, or at least of the off season, I should say. So it's really exciting because I think we were all kind of panicking and sad and heartbroken. So really, really exciting. It'll be really interesting to have him face against, of course, MLS opposition, which we'll talk about shortly, because we finally know what's going to go on with regard to preseason friendlies.
yeah. Finally.
Yeah, at last, better late than never. As well, like there's been a lot of hype around Sean Rea, I think, since he's returned from CPL.
Hmm.
So obviously, he and Michael Miljevic were out there together in the first half. So how did you see them? Because when you look at them on their own within their respective teams that they played with last year, there were a lot of similarities between their style.
Yeah.
So how was it to have the two of them out there together?
I think it's going to be very rare that you see them on the field together, unless it's kind of like end game, end of the game, and you need a goal or something like that, and
Yeah,
maybe through substitutions they end up on the field together.
yeah,
I find it very unlikely they're going to start together just because they're so similar. They occupy basically the same space in the field to the point where sometimes they got in each other's way. Matko Milivojevic had a really good game, and the fact that his similarity with his familiarity, sorry, with a lot of the players kind of led to him getting the ball a lot means that Sean Rea kind of faded into the shadows a little bit for a decent chunk of his time on the field. And I think the fact that if they do have these two attacking midfielders behind a lone striker, you're going to need one to drive the ball forward. You need one that can play make and kind of sit back and also attract the defender and open up space. So the fact that Rhea and Matko Milivojevic are so similar does kind of mean that they may not be compatible in the same spot. So it did prove to be a bit of a headache at times until they kind of started to slowly but surely figure it out. So if they can
hmm
make it work, then it's going to be brilliant because they're two very gifted players, but they're also two very ball dominant players. They need the ball at their feet all the time to kind of, you know, create their own space, then play a ball, attract a lot of attention from defenders. So if they do find a way to work together, it'll be very, very, very potent. But right now, if things continue like this, it could spell complications if they're on the field at the same time, which is also a good thing for Mathieu Chouanier and Ahmed Hamdi, who do play that other side of what you expect in a 10. So if they do go with those two 10s, those two creative midfielders, it would be very good to have a balance. And that's where Ahmed Hamdi and Mathieu Chouanier kind of will find their minutes at that position. That's why, Mathieu Chouanier backed himself to be, one of, if not George's replacement. So um, it was kind of, I wasn't blown away by Sean Rea because he just didn't get the ball that much on Saturday.
hmm
But again, there's no doubting his talent and his confidence. And when he did get the ball, he did do some really good things. The problem is he only got the ball, I think, a handful of times. Whereas Matko was consistently the focal point before, the final ball into to be it, one of the wingbacks or to
yeah,
Kyoto. So I think there still needs to be maybe some familiarity built with Rea and the rest of the midfield, or maybe just, some fine tuning in terms of positioning, because both of them do struggle still a little bit off the ball, right? Matko was probably the biggest knock against him last year was his movement off the ball. It's where Georgie was so good. On the ball, he was
hmm
great. He can beat a defender and pick out a pass very well. But when he didn't have the ball, he kind of just faded away. Whereas Georgie was constantly a threat and made defenders pay attention at any given moment. So Milivojevic has improved in that area, but that there's still obviously work to be done. And if it means that they're going to be playing together, you're going to need to increase that work that much more because they're going to end up bumping into each other. And it's a great way to stall an offense. As we saw in the first 10, 15 minutes, they really just ended up getting in each other's way. So Sean Rea ended
yeah,
up, taking the hit and maybe moving a bit further out wide and not getting as much attention. But in a game, you can't have a player sent to a position just to kind of not do anything. That's a waste of a player. So
no,
there's still a lot to figure out in terms of that number 10 debate, and the fact that there's so many people competing for it will only make Usada's job that much more complicated. But it's better to
well,
have an
better to have.
embarrassment of riches than to
Yeah,
have not enough.
took the words out of my mouth. Excellent.
Exactly.
We did just have a comment from Chan because, of course, the graphic that we had showed, it looked like a 3-4-2-1 or a 3-4-3, if you will. But Chan has commented that it looked like a 4-3-3.
Yeah,
So was there any difference maybe when they were in possession versus out of possession, for example,
exactly.
or was there
And
some
that,
changing around?
yeah.
Yeah.
And that's something that they've
Okay.
done during the season too. You saw them play under Nasi like this as well, right? Where
hmm
whichever side had the ball, that wingback would push up into a winger position, and then the fullback would be that side center back will become a fullback. Right? You saw it with Kamal Miller all the time, where Lassie, if the ball was on the left side of the field, Lassie would become a winger practically, and Miller would play a left back. Right? You saw him make his way all the way into the opponent box at a number of occasions, which is not something you see from a center back. So in possession, they don't play a standard three back because nowadays no team in possession plays the same way that they line up. because it
Yeah.
becomes too easy to counteract. So yeah, it does look a lot like a 4-3-3 in that sense, because then you have, Rhea, who played a bit further wide. That means it looked like Lassie and Rhea were the wingers, and then Kyoto was the man up top. But in defense, or their default positioning would be that. But again, in possession, the great thing about having such versatile outside center backs is the fact that they could step into fullback and not miss a beat. So
Yeah.
you will see it look a lot of the time that they're playing four back during the season, just because of the fact that the middle three are so technically proficient that they can play in that spot, but they still played three back slash five back, like Losada said. That's the way they're going to play this season, and it's good that they're that variable, because again, the whole point is to keep defenses on their toes, and if they can build up and then establish possession in the other team's half and in the attacking third like that, then it's great, because you can't really prepare against a team that's constantly shifting formations.
Mm-hmm. No, fascinating. Anything else to add on that first half before we quickly move on to the second half?
No, I mean, again, it took them a while to kind of get their feet set and establish a rhythm. But once they did, they were lights out. Nathan Saliba looked really good. Didn't really didn't stand out, wasn't exceptional, but didn't put a foot wrong. Played very. I mean, it's very easy to look good next to Victor Wanyama. He makes everybody better. Everybody he plays with automatically, just you see the level of their
Mm-hmm.
play improve, and that's one of the best things about Victor Wanyama, is that he brings the level of people around him up. So Nathan Saliba looked good as that second pivot. He looked comfortable in position, and he brought that kind of burst of pace that counteracts Wanyama's more methodical
Methodical.
approach to the game.
Yep.
Yeah, methodical. That's what I was looking for. So yeah, it's nice to see how he kind of settles into that role well. I still think that he has a lot of work to do if he wants to fight Samuel Piet for that starting position. I still think that Piet's to lose. But yeah, I mean, all around, nobody really had a bad half
Mm-hmm.
in the first unit of players. The second half is where it kind of got a little bit tired, and it got a little bit complacent almost, and that's where it got a
Mm-hmm.
little bit disappointing, right? The back line was rock solid, right? It was the back line was Quizera and Brogiard on as the wing
Yeah.
backs. Then you had Miller, Waterman, and George Campbell as the
Mm-hmm.
as the back three, and they were excellent. The first half, the U23s actually found some time to get forward and even play a ball through and at least put some pressure on the back line. That did not happen in the second half. I think
Yeah.
they sniffed the attacking third maybe once or twice, and it was quickly snuffed out. So defensively, the second half was very strong, but it's going forward that I was left disappointed, because it seemed very much like the first 15 minutes were great because they were aggressive. The second unit has a lot of pace, has a lot of speed, and they use that to their advantage. They played the ball out wide. Brogiard and Quizera are both very quick, and they're both a nightmare for opposing fullbacks, and they kind of utilize that. They played the ball wide, they got the fullbacks involved, and they accelerated play a lot. And then around the hour mark, they kind of just stopped. You know,
Oh.
they kind of just seemed very content playing in possession. The odd acceleration down the middle. It was some nice balls, especially from Rita Zouir, who was just going back and forth across that midfield. Samer Piet was the lone pivot at the back, and he did his job very confidently. He broke up any kind of attack. He did what Samuel Piet does. Uh, my issue was mostly with that front three, if you will, of Hamdi, Toy, and Sunusi, where it just seemed like there was no ideas. It just seemed like they got the ball at their feet, and they were like making it up as they go, and there just didn't seem to be any kind of chemistry there. That's also due in part because Hamdi spent a lot of the year injured, Toy spent a lot of the year injured, Sunusi spent a lot of the year on the bench, so they have no rapport with one another. So, and you
Yeah.
could tell that the second any one of them got the ball, they had no idea what the other players' tendencies were, and they were kind of just winging it. So the second unit was a unit that has very little chemistry, because just the sheer lack of playtime with one another
Yeah.
led to that. But I mean, the only three people that are comfortable with one another on that team were Waterman, Miller, and Piet because they've played together both national team and all of last season. So that looked good. But it got to the point where, Miller was running up into the box because he was sick and tired of nothing happening to try and kind of like force something. And it was just a whole lot of that rinse and repeat for the last half hour, and nothing really happened. Sanusi and Toy both got some really good opportunities, couldn't convert. Zachary Brogier had a wide open net, got on the end of a cross that kind of went through the entire defense, but put it wide. So it was, not only did they not really create much, when they did end up creating, they couldn't put the finishing touch on it. And I think that's going to be the biggest difference maker between who ends up getting a starting spot. And you just saw how fresh and how familiar and how creative that first unit was in that first half. And the second half, it was very much just, all right, I made one pass. What do I do next? Instead of knowing automatically, like, I've received the ball, I know where four different people are already, and we can keep going
Yeah.
and continuing this fluidly.
Yeah. No, it'll be really interesting to see, I guess, who gets their footing back and not. Because like Mason Toy, he did end up, once he came back, he did end up getting some looks in, but I think unfortunately his confidence just took such a hit,
Yeah.
as things continued not to come off for him, which is certainly of no help. But obviously there's still a lot of preseason for players to get those, get that familiarity with each other, and hopefully find that kind of that freedom, and want to play again. Anything else to add on the scrimmage before we move on to the rest of kind of preseason stuff?
Yeah, all three goalies look really good with the ball at their feet. Very calm, very composed.
Hallelujah.
Jonathan Jonathan Sirois got caught out with, the turnover, and he was out of position, and that was unfortunate. But in terms of with the ball at their feet, which is something that Nalsi and Losada both emphasize you have to be very good at. That was one of the main drawbacks for Sebastian Breza. They all looked very good with the ball at their feet. Anytime that they would get pressed, they found their outlet, they found their defender, they found be it Wenyama or Piet in the midfield as an outlet. So that was very nice to see that all three look very comfortable with the ball at their feet. It's looking like Pantemis will be the starter and Jonathan Siwa maybe the backup. But
Mhm.
as far as in terms of technical capability, all three of them look super comfortable, which is very nice to see.
It's a relief. Awesome. We did have a question, that I think probably just fits in well here. It's another question from Majid. So this one is about Mako Miljevic. Can you tell me if Mako speaks English? And then I believe only heard him speaking Spanish. If not, I'm thinking having a Spanish speaking coach with him is now only going to help with communication and the attitude manner. Thank you. Do
Yeah, I
have
mean, it's
go
good.
ahead.
It's obviously it's nice to see that you have a coach that speaks three languages and can comfortably communicate his ideas in all three.
Mhm.
Matko does speak English. He did communicate on the field in English a decent amount. I just think he doesn't speak to the media in English or French because he can't communicate as well to like completely get his ideas across. So he just he relies on a translator, which is completely fine.
Mhm.
But yes, he does in fact speak English. But I think that having a Spanish speaking coach, again, he was joking around with Rome Kyoto on the bench, right, and Osada. So having someone that can have rapport in three different languages fluently is only a good thing. So I think that that'll help if Losada has to speak with Matko about whatever the case may be, or even Romel about whatever it is, that they can have that conversation in their native language and really communicate properly.
Awesome. Yeah. No, hopefully that does help. I think we definitely had a lot of question marks about Mako Miljevic last year. So hopefully there's nothing that gets lost in translation this year. It's going to be humanly impossible.
Exactly.
Yeah. So with that being said, obviously Montreal is going to wrap up the Montreal leg of their preseason this week. So they are remaining in Montreal until Sunday coming, at which point they're going to take off once again to Florida. They will be continuing to train there, and they will also be participating in everyone's favorite tournament, which admittedly is a little less heartwarming. The Tampa Bay Rowdies Invitational, and we just say rest in peace to the hill with rolling children, because that hill has now been populated by like benches or tables. So Gonna miss that, but nonetheless, always, of course, kind of a nice preseason tradition to see the Tampa Bay Rowdies stadium and everything like that. Inter Miami and the Houston Dynamo are also going to be there, so we'll be playing some preseason friendlies against them, as well as against the a university team, Florida International University. Don't know much about them. um, However, before Montreal takes off to Florida, they're going to play another match here in Montreal against the PLSQ All Stars. That's going to be a team selected by a vote from the coaches across the PLSQ, and they'll be led by that league's coach of the year, FC Laval's Boubacar Koulibaly. So really interesting to see this. FC Laval, AS Blainville, and CS Saint Laurent all have really strong representation. They each have 5 players showing. And I will just bring up the list. I won't read them all because it is quite a long list, but we do have quite a few players. We also have probably some familiar names on this list. Any names that you recognize there, Elias?
Well, I mean, I covered
Yeah,
PLSQ back in
exactly.
my time in student journalism. So I'm
Exactly.
familiar with Renan Diaz, who played professionally in Brazil, actually, and
Yeah.
who's been their captain and who plays a very strong role in the midfield. So I think he was one of the best players. I think he won the award for one of the best players in the league last year. Obviously, Wandré Lefebvre, everybody remembers him.
Mm-hmm.
Louis Kwemi, who is the leading goal scorer. So it'll be interesting to see maybe, that back line can get a bit of a workout, see if they can, see if Kwemi can maybe test how far they've come defensively, because we know how Montreal last year in terms of keeping the ball in the net was hit or miss some games.
Yeah.
So it'll be interesting to see a higher level of opposition this season, this time around, and they're playing on Friday, I
Mm-hmm.
believe. So
Mm-hmm.
it'll be nice to kind of take that in. I will be live tweeting that one too if you guys want to follow along. So
Oh, fantastic.
that'll be a very interesting game, because it's also, like I said before, it's not just under 23s. It's, people that have played professionally, people that played semi-pro their entire life, and people that have,
Mm-hmm.
it's no longer that physical dominance that you're going to have by playing a youth team.
Yeah, no, exactly. I think it's going to be really exciting. Obviously, I think this is also something that's kind of long overdue. Is
Yeah.
some partnership with the semi-pro divisions that we have here, because I mean, the PLSQ, when they play against other leagues, because it will they do eventually expand to play against other teams in League One BC or League One Ontario, what have you. They always represent so strongly, consistently. So I'm really excited to see this. I think it's a really nice collaboration. Um, Great visibility for that league as well. Unfortunately, it isn't going to be open to the public. I think that would have been really
No,
cool to have that match open to the public, but unfortunately, no such luck. Of course, you will be there because the match is going to be open to members of Soccer Quebec and the media. Any other thoughts to add on that? I think it's really cool, and I'm really excited to see how it goes. I kind of hope it does become like a tradition.
absolutely. I really hope it does become a tradition, because again, it's nice to get PLSQ representation, and maybe that opens the door. Hopefully, maybe next year it's open to the public and more people get to
Mm-hmm.
see just how good PLSQ players actually are. It brings more attention and more revenue to those clubs, and helps expand. So it's all about, not just showing off how good CF Montreal is, but showing off how good, some of the lower leagues in the
Quebec
province are.
soccer's.
Exactly.
Yeah. Like I remember when we had Anthony Tatera on here, I think back in the summer, he had so many wonderful things to say about the players playing in PLSQ and,
Yeah,
just Quebec soccer players in general. So I'm really glad that this is occurring. I think I would hope, like I said, if this occurs in the future, that eventually they either like live stream it or open it to the public or something, because I think it would be a really great opportunity to showcase those players. Of
absolutely.
course, yeah. Um, So, moving along with some preseason news, of course, we have had a ton of rumors surrounding Montreal players coming, going here, there, everywhere. And finally, one of those rumors came to fruition this week. Um, Joaquin Torres, a player for the past 2 seasons with Montreal, has been traded to Philadelphia Union for a total of $500,000 in GAM spread across this season and next, plus up to $300,000 of conditional GAM. So, honestly, I was talking with our friends from Duke by the River, like just kind of, messaging back and forth on this one. And I kind of feel like every party feels like they've won this trade. How do you feel about it?
Yeah, I think, you know, Joaquin Torres is a very talented player that was just stuck in a system that isn't right for him, right? I feel like he is
Mm-hmm.
a true proper winger that loves to cut
Yeah.
in on his strong foot and, play that way. And Nancy and by the looks of Losada are coaches that don't utilize wingers. They have wing backs and they have central players. That's pretty much it. So he kind of found himself on the outside looking in. He found himself coming off the
Mm-hmm.
bench a lot. And then, when Kai Kamara came in and started performing, he found himself even behind Kamara. So it was very obvious that he wasn't going to be a starter under Nalci, and it looked like that was going to continue under Losada. So I understand why, he was open to a move. And that's why I also think, like you said, both parties come out a winner on this, right? Montreal gets that much
Mm-hmm.
more GAM, gets, builds up the resources, and Philly get a very technically talented offensive presence, which is, as you know, in MLS, you can never have too many.
Yeah.
So I think that, like you said, it's a fairly even trade. It also helps Montreal, like I said earlier, break even on the Aaron Herrera
Mm-hmm.
trade that saw them send $500,000 a game to Salt Lake City. And I
Mm-hmm.
think that, overall, I think it's a win-win, which is rare but also very nice to see a lot of the time in MLS.
Yeah, absolutely. And, as well, Montreal is also going to be paying some GAM as well to Nashville again this year, for example, because
Yes,
in some
for
of
that's
Montreal's
positive.
receiving trades as well, they've spread their GAM across some years. So, like you said, it is really important to kind of balance that budget. And Olivier Renard, he did do an interview this week with John Still on TSN 690. And in mentioning this trade, he said it was important to free up some salary cap space because, of course, MLS has its fun rules.
Yeah,
And as well, we also can't forget that Joaquin Torres took up an international spot, which is also worth its own money, even though it's
yeah,
not worth quite as much as it used to be. Um, and during this interview, anyway, Olivier Renard also did not shut down the possibility of an incoming transfer during the next week or coming days, 2 weeks, so to speak. So I got to ask, do you think this is going to be? Do you think this could be an MLS type transfer within the league, given all the GAM that Montreal has collected, or could you see this potentially being a player coming from outside?
yeah. I think they have uh, eggs in both baskets. I think that the fact that Olivier Renal does want to bring this club to the standard of European clubs and kind
Mm-hmm.
of have that idea, bring in players from Europe, especially young talent, isn't it isn't the wildest idea. They brought in again Elias Iliadis. They have Chanon Zofor, who's overseas right now, who's gaining experience in Europe, right? Who will most likely end up coming back in time for the Florida camp. So
Yeah.
I don't think it's completely out of line for them to bring in, especially with Torres leaving and Kai Kamara very clearly not in the plans of this club, to bring in maybe another young, promising offensive talent, right? Be it hope probably
Mm-hmm.
someone first tell that could play wide in the middle and drop deep a little bit. There's a number of talented players in MLS that can do the same thing. So
Mm-hmm.
I think that them not limiting their search to just MLS or some of the smaller leagues in Europe does mean that they have a better idea. Again, the selling of all these players to European clubs, the selling of George Mihailovic, Ismail Kone, and Alistair Johnston
Mm-hmm.
just this year alone does mean that they do have some capital to maybe go out in Europe and sign someone impressive. But again, like you said, this GAM means that they'd also bring someone in from MLS that's made a mark. So I think that having that having a decent amount of funds in both of those pools just increases their their search window. So I
Mhm.
genuinely couldn't tell you where Olivier Renard's head is at. He's someone that's very good at keeping you guessing, as we've seen since he's been here. But I think that they've got themselves in a really good situation that if they do want to go out and get somebody, they have all these options now, which
And
is
not to
a
mention,
result of some good trades and some good transfer.
yeah, exactly. And not to mention, there's two DP spots open.
There's two DP spots, right?
A a girl can dream, a girl can dream. I know.
We know that Olivier Renard is not thrilled about bringing in names like that, and
Yep,
that's something
I
that
know.
he told Losada right away that we're not
I know.
dropping Lorenzo Insigne money, and but yes, a girl can dream, right? We can all dream. It would be nice to see another Didier Drogba level superstar come to
Yep.
Montreal. But at the end of the day, this is Olivier Renald's direction, and he's made it very clear that that is not in their plans, right? Especially
Yeah.
while they still have
Or even like a
we could
young
count ourselves
DP. I
lucky we
mean,
have
that's
someone like
also
Wanyama,
really
right?
cool.
The
Yeah.
problem is, I think with a young DP is if they're good enough to be labeled the DP, they don't
Yeah.
want to come to MLS yet, and that's another thing that MLS has to work on in terms of building its
Mm,
profile, and that's another thing that Montreal is. If Montreal continues to do well in these developing young players, not just making them play well, but also giving a good product and getting good results on the field and in the standings, they will eventually be able to attract these younger DPs. I think right now they're on the right track. I think right now, just with the three transfers this window, and then again with the sale of most likely at the very least Joel Waterman and Kamal Miller at the end of the year, if they keep up their same form, I think that yes, then you could start talking about bringing in a promising young DP and bring in someone that 2 or 3 years ago, someone of that status in terms of a young talent would never consider coming to MLS. But now they see
mhm,
Montreal as a genuine stepping stone to one of Europe's big five leagues or even the Eredivisie. So
mhm.
it's a
Exactly.
process, and this year they're trying to look for a more proof of concept, if you will, that
Yeah.
this wasn't a fluke that we just lucked out on all these insane young talents. But
Yeah.
it's it's
Fair enough.
it's
I,
baby steps.
I appreciate your realism. You bring me back down to earth. Thank you. Thank you. Go cry after this episode. No, I'm joking. I appreciate your realism because it is true. You have not one word you said was a lie or like aggressively pessimistic or anything. But a girl will continue to dream nonetheless.
As we should all, right? I was the first. I'll be the first one to fly the flag if Olivier who comes to town, right? Something like
There
that.
you go.
Absolutely, I will be at the airport welcome him. I don't care, man. If Olivier who comes to town,
Yeah.
absolutely, that'd be
Yeah.
awesome. But unfortunately, I've
Alas.
become something of a
Yeah.
cynic.
No, no worries. You're in good company with pessimistic Eve. But anything else to add on preseason before we turn our attention to big news on the national team front?
Not really. No, I mean, again, this next week is going to be where we kind of get hopefully some more answers to some of the burning questions we have. We're gonna get a better
Hmm.
idea of how Losada wants to play, and we'll get a better idea of maybe a better idea of who he's starting to prefer. Right? I don't think we'll get anything close to a starting 11 against the PLSQ. I think again it'll be as many
Like a
different
mixed.
combinations as possible.
Yeah.
Exactly. Um, but I think we'll start to see who's gonna start, separating themselves and making themselves noticed at training. That'll be nice to see if anyone
Hmm.
really just shows that they're really getting with the system and they
Yeah.
really enjoy or they can thrive under something that Losada has cooked up. So hopefully we'll get some more answers to that, but it really is just, a lot of question marks around the entire club again.
Cool. Cool. Well, I look forward to talking about this coming week's results with you next week.
Absolutely. Very
There
excited.
we go. Excellent. So, talking about some big, I feel like this news dropped really kind of quietly almost, but I actually
Yeah.
feel like the news was fairly massive. So ever since the World Cup wrapped up, of course, there's been lots of rumors that the hosts of, and maybe lots of just hopeful whisperings as well, that the hosts
Yeah.
of the 2026 World Cup, including Canada, would or should be invited to the 2024 edition of Copa America. And lo and behold, CONMEBOL and CONCACAF, they did not hold back when they decided to collaborate. So on Friday, like a very quiet announcement was published online, announcing a strategic partnership between CONCACAF and CONMEBOL, and that's going to have the 2024 edition of Copa America actually played in the United States. There's going to be 10 CONMEBOL teams, and there will be also 6 CONCACAF teams invited. Qualification for the CONCACAF teams is going to be based on performance in the 2023-2024 Nations League, of course, which has already started and will pick back up in March. So we're going to talk more about the rest of that announcement in a minute, but let's just kind of deal with this bit first. What
Yeah.
did you think when you read this?
I think this is exactly what CONCACAF needs. I think that, with Mexico really being the only one that has a history of playing high level teams in competitive tournaments, right? The US has
Mm-hmm.
done it here and there, but they missed the last
Yeah.
World Cup, right? Yes, they played against Portugal in an elimination game, but missing the World Cup, you miss out on that valuable experience. Canada played, two would be World Cup semifinalists and 2018's World Cup semifinalist, right? So
Mm-hmm.
they got their first taste of high level opposition in arenas that matters, right? There's only so much
Yeah.
experience you can derive from playing people in a friendly. So the fact that they're
Mm-hmm.
going to once again be playing high level opposition in a competitive setting is incredibly valuable, especially given the fact that this 2026 World Cup is going to be in some part on home soil. This
Yeah.
is a once in a lifetime opportunity for Canada to get this right. And I kind of
Mm-hmm.
wrote about this in after the World Cup ended, where John Herdman has a bit of pressure now to prove that he's the man for the job.
Yeah.
But just the fact that Canada soccer in general has such a small margin of error right now because they can no longer take any Nations League opponent lightly. Every single point now is going
And
to
they've
be
already lost
absolutely
one
vital,
match.
and they've already lost one
Yeah.
match. So this has to be this is going to be a lot of pressure for what is not rated very highly the Nations League. You see it even in Europe, right? They don't really take it that seriously, or as seriously as they would the Euro. Now this
Mm-hmm.
becomes almost do or die because if they miss out on this Copa America, it is disastrous. It's not just like, oh well, we're not playing another tournament. We still have
No.
friendlies to play, and we have the Gold Cup in 2025, 2025, I believe. No, this is
Yeah.
terrible news. This is like, and I'm not someone that
Oh.
gets very dramatic about how bad things are. I'm usually someone that downplays bad news. This is absolutely catastrophic, right? Because this is your golden generation. This is the best pool of talent you've
Yeah.
ever had, and you have a World Cup where a lot of these players will be at the peak of their powers. They'll all be in their early, mid, or late 20s. This is your best opportunity you're likely ever going to get to not only improve soccer in Canada, improve and increase the visibility tenfold to what it was in Qatar, but also just get a good result in front of most likely an insane amount of home fans because we know that Canadian fans will travel. That is not something
Mm-hmm.
that is not something that we're going to that we're going to let stop us, especially if it's no longer overseas. We're literally in the same continent.
Yeah.
So there's an insane amount of pressure, but the reason there's so much pressure is because of how good of an opportunity this is, and this welcome news for CONCACAF. It's why I love this title because CONMEBOL gets CONCACAF is probably my favorite title in a long time
Thank,
for the podcast. It's
thank you.
amazing,
I thought
but
all of myself. God love you.
it's genius. But it's that's the thing, right? CONCACAF is cannot let this opportunity slip.
Yeah.
So any CONCACAF team that goes there has to show up because you just don't get a chance like this every
Exactly.
day. So it's
Exactly.
hugely important for the teams that make it, especially for the three teams that are hosting World Cup and guarantee qualification. This is the biggest preparation tournament you could ever possibly hope to
Yeah.
achieve, and you'll be playing the likes of Argentina and Uruguay
Yeah.
and Brazil and Chile. So this is I'm not someone who hypes things up a lot, but this is so vitally important for the future of this federation that they absolutely have to go all in for every single Nations League game now, especially because, as previously mentioned by Jan, they already have one game lost. So they
Mhm.
have to make up for that now.
Absolutely. It's going to be massive. You know, it's so hard now to have friendlies because all the different federations are now doing things like nation leagues, and they also have their different continental tournaments, plus a lot of their players, they might be in full season mode, whereas many of the Canadian players who are based in North America are in off season mode, so it's just kind of tricky to schedule.
Mhm.
And I think we've complained a lot that it's really hard to get outside of CONCACAF. I mean, it's vital. I am a little bit disappointed. I get the logistics, but it would have been, I think, a really good experience as well for the team to travel to a South American country. I mean, I know that they've experienced a lot of hostility traveling within CONCACAF because that is one of the features that CONCACAF certainly offers. But I think like the it's playing in front of those gigantic stadiums, which I mean they did certainly do in Qatar, but I don't know if maybe it would have been as passionate as it can be in countries like Brazil or Argentina or Chile, or any of the other countries in CONMEBOL. So I think that would have been a really good experience for the team, should they make it. But logistically speaking, like you said, that's going to be excellent for Canadian national team fans to travel should Canada qualify. And if I'm Nick Bontis and I'm John Herdman, holy moly, I am laser focused.
This is
Yeah,
priority number one, two, and three for the federation right now. For the men's side, this
absolutely.
is yeah,
Absolutely, no distractions. Like this is vital. I think it's finally brought. I think it's finally forcing us to take Nations League really seriously.
yeah.
Because, like you said, I don't think it was given its seriousness, and finally, it is leading to something really important, beyond just FIFA stuff. So amazing. But we're not done yet with the news
No,
about this announcement.
but wait, there's more.
Uh, but wait, there's more. Also in 2024, the CONCACAF W Gold Cup is going to invite the top four CONMEBOL Copa America or Women's Copa America teams, which those teams have already been determined because the match, of course, 2022 has already happened. So it's going to be Brazil, Colombia, Argentina, and Paraguay. This tournament will also take place in the US. Canada has not qualified for the CONCACAF W Gold Cup. It depends on the outcome of their match versus Jamaica as they seek Olympic qualification. So again, really interesting to see that we're going to see this the symbiosis once again between the
Yeah.
women's teams as well. I'm really fascinated by that. What do you think of it?
I think this entire release, and we're gonna get to the last bit, is a massive win for CONCACAF in general, who's really making a lot of improvements in terms of raising the status of soccer, especially in countries like the
Mm-hmm.
US and like Canada, where soccer is second, or even the US, where it's like third, fourth, sometimes even fifth fiddle to depending on what state you live in. So I think that, obviously raising the women's game is easier said than done. I think that, it's going along very well in countries like Canada and the US,
Mm-hmm.
but having improved in all of CONCACAF, this is a great starting point, right? This is a
Mm-hmm.
great it's a great kind of kickstart to maybe getting it improved women's programs all over CONCACAF, and not just, having that Canada US dominance in the federation, in the confederation.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, this entire press release is just, win after win for CONCACAF, and I'm very excited to see just how much they can kind of improve just on this, and maybe carry this momentum forward into, new initiatives that help grow the game even more.
Yeah, I definitely agree. You know, obviously, Canada, like you said, Canada and the US in women's soccer, they're the top two in CONCACAF for sure. I know, like Canada, obviously has recently seen a lot of Brazil because they played them at the Olympics. They just had two friendlies against them not that long ago, back in the fall. They even played Argentina not that long ago as well. But that being said, for me, like to face um, different nations than what you usually face
Yeah,
in a competitive scenario, and like I think we all know that Brazil is miles ahead in terms of women's soccer compared to the remainder of the CONMEBOL countries. Although they're coming along, like to give them credit, I think Argentina is making great strides, in particular. But that being said, in a competitive scenario, it is way different than in a friendly scenario. So I think it's just fantastic, both for the men's and the women's team, that we're going to finally diversify the teams that they're playing in competitive scenarios, because CONCACAF, it's just so repetitive.
yeah,
So I'm thrilled. I'm really thrilled by this announcement for both sets. Like you said, for all of CONCACAF, this is just a big win. And last but not least, and like I feel like this fell by the wayside, even though it is kind of going to be
absolutely.
like a
Yeah,
recurrence, even
yeah,
though like the two pieces that we announced, they're kind of one-offs as far as we know anyway. But here's that we're going to have a recurring competition between CONCACAF and CONMEBOL club teams. This is just applying to
yeah,
the men's game. Um, but there's going to be a quote unquote Final Four style competition between the top two teams from each confederation. And they are going to qualify through the existing competitions. I'm going to assume that means CONCACAF Champions League and Copa Libertadores. So they're going to somehow find time to squeeze in a trophy tournament. I don't know when, I don't know how, but starting in 2024, that is going to occur. What do you think about this? Because, of course, really the only time clubs really step outside of their confederation is if they make it to the Club World Cup. So, what do you
yeah.
think?
I mean, I welcome this obviously as someone who loves seeing, MLS teams take on bigger opposition and
Mhm.
seeing, just where they stand. This is another really great step forward. This is, I mean, obviously you're going to see an MLS team in the Club World Cup, which is kind of awesome. But
Yep.
this having MLS teams consistently play against Brazilian and Chilean and Argentinian clubs, which are again, among the biggest in the world in terms of not just support but quality, is going to be nothing but positive, right? And again, this has to jumpstart some kind of improvement in terms of not just the amount of support that MLS clubs get at home, but also just their standing amongst the global community of soccer clubs. They have to be.
Mhm.
This is hopefully the first in many steps towards MLS not just being seen as a retirement league, right? So again, this is obviously improving, and it's not being the case as much. But in Europe, MLS is still seen kind of with like a certain amount of disdain. They do tend to turn their nose up at us, and
Mhm.
so this new competition kind of increases the validity of MLS and kind of shows the quality of the teams here, right? And again, hopefully that we can have some good consistent representation of the Club World Cup, and even maybe surprise some teams and win some games. But this is again the first step, but what has to be the first step of many, and not just like, all right, pat yourself on the back, we got some CONMEBOL games, cool, whatever, and then we're done. No, this has to
Yeah.
like be consistent effort, and there has to be some kind of progression, because it can't just be this. You have to continuously push to improve it in some way or another. So good first step. That's all I
Yep.
have to say about that club aspect. But like I said, in general for CONCACAF, as far as a starting point for improving the visibility of both the men's and women's game in CONCACAF and all over the world, great first step.
Yeah.
But I
Yeah.
desperately want to see what comes next.
Yeah, I'm going to be really curious to watch all of those tournaments in 2024, and obviously, I'm
Okay,
sure if we're still around, which we should be, knock on wood, I'm sure we'll have lots to say about it in
absolutely.
another 52 odd episodes of the Ball is Round. That being said,
Hopefully.
yeah, Let's move on to the just a quick bit of news from the women's national team because we did have a retirement from a very long time servant of the national team, and that is Erin McLeod, goalkeeper. So she announced this week her retirement from international soccer. She is planning to play at least one more pro season. She and her wife are both moving to Iceland, where they plan to play at least, like I said, one more season for Erin McLeod. So Erin McLeod had her first cap way back in 2002, and she made 119 appearances for the Canadian women's national team. And in fact, her very last cap, little did we know, came at Stade Saputo in
It's true.
2021. Yeah, yeah, in October at that gold medal celebration friendly match
Yeah,
against
it's
New
true.
Zealand. Yeah,
Some of the
yeah,
great
we had
games,
no
yeah.
idea at the time. Yeah, no, it was
Yeah.
really cool. The weather was horrible, but no, it was really fun. Um, yeah, so little did we know we were kind of seeing the end of history there. And I think one of the things for me, anyway, that stands out most about Erin McLeod's career is just the sheer perseverance that she had. She tore her ACL 3 times during her career, which is just that's a terrible injury for any player to come back from. We know lots of players don't even come back from it at all. But each and every time she came back to continue playing both at the club level and of course internationally. Obviously, as time went on, of course, Stephanie Leve kind of took the spotlight from her and stepped into that starting role, and it's now been handed over to Kaylin Sheridan. And while she didn't play, she was also part of the squad that won the 2021 Olympic gold medal. Just a quick word, Elias, if you will, on the legacy that she's going to leave behind within that national team.
Yeah, I mean, not just in the national team, but just in Canadian soccer fans in general, right? She's one of the pioneers of Canadian women's soccer. So I remember, watching her perform at all these tournaments and watching her be one of the best in the world at her position. And that the I mean, never gonna forget that penalty stop against Brazil. Um,
Yeah.
and just the fact that, I've had 2 knee surgeries, and they are incredibly difficult, not just physically, but mentally to recover from. And to do that 3 times, and so she had to one up me, of course, but, do
Mhm.
that 3 times and also then come back and play at such an elite level is something that very few, if any, professional athletes can boast. So the like you said, the sheer perseverance is astonishing, really, because I know firsthand just how difficult knee surgery and knee injuries are to come back from, especially in a sport like soccer, which is so demanding on your knees. And
Mhm.
I have nothing but the utmost respect for her, and I'm happy she's still playing. It's gonna be a sad day when she finally hangs them up for good, but it's nothing but great things to say about her.
Yeah, absolutely. No, a massive career, a massive footprint to leave behind. And I do hope maybe, she'll have some involvement with that professional league coming. I hope that as well.
That would be
Obviously,
awesome.
though, it's up to her choice because, of course, she is going to be living in Iceland. Yeah, but anyway, but speaking of goalkeepers, I felt this was worth mentioning because we had talked about the news when it dropped regarding Sabrina D'Angelo. Because of course, especially now with Erin McLeod retiring, I think there's a big question mark behind Kaylin Sheridan for second goalkeeper. Because we have lots of players like oh my gosh, we have all kinds of players coming up, many of whom are very young, but nonetheless, Sabrina D'Angelo is somebody that we had mentioned. So she had recently signed for Arsenal WFC, of
Yeah.
course. And, we kind of had, I think when we were talking about it on the podcast, when it occurred, we kind of said, oh, we don't really expect to see her play at all. Like, she's definitely, obviously, she's behind Manuela Zinsberger, who's a very, very excellent goalkeeper, one of the top at our game for sure. But lo and behold, midweek last week,
That's what
Sabrina
yeah.
D'Angelo did in fact make her debut for club. She played in Wednesday's FA Women's League Cup match versus Aston Villa, and she did indeed keep a clean sheet as they won that match 3-0. So really exciting, and I definitely think if she can get a look in, even as second keeper with some cup games, I think she has a very strong shout to make for backup to Kayla Sheridan. Any thoughts on that before we
Yeah,
move on?
yeah, I mean, I mean, Arsenal is a very strong team, right? And again, they're
Exactly.
a game behind, but they're in a 3-team or even 4-team potentially race for the Women's Super League title, which is turning
Yeah.
into honestly one of the most that and the Bundesliga are like two of the most
Yeah.
intense title fights right now, and they're so fun to follow. So yeah, I mean, it's always great when you perform well on a really good team because that standard is so high. So I think,
Hmm.
with the clean sheet in an FA Cup win, I think Arsenal, or I think management may, rely on her a bit more. I
Hmm.
think, she keeps on proving herself, and again, it's also sending a message to Bev Friesman, go like, look, I am at that level where I am
Yeah.
very competent. I'm competently replacing one of the best goalkeepers in the world at one of the best women's teams in the world. So I think
Exactly.
that, her even if she will obviously not start as many games as I think she'd hope, uh
Hmm.
every time she gets in goal, I think if she just, you know
Yeah.
performs at that level, she can actually
Hmm.
she can genuinely compete for the starting spot, but definitely make the backup position her own,
Yeah. Completely
solidified.
agree with you. Completely agree. So it'll be really interesting to watch to see how much playing time she does end up
Yeah.
getting because, of course, they do continue on to the next round in the FA Cup. So fingers crossed that means more playing time for her. But that wraps up part one. So we're gonna head on over to part two, and with our intro first, of course. In honor of Hattie.
100.
All right. Yeah. So, Elias, you are once again our
Yeah.
social media master. So, we'll get
Yes.
started with our tweets of the week. So,
First,
first and foremost,
yes. Yeah, so this is from Tristan D'Amour, who's a friend of the podcast and,
hmm
very good reporter. CONMEBOL and CONCACAFed announced that that 2024 Copa America will be held in the US, will recruit 6 guest nations from CONCACAF. These 6 teams will qualify to the 2023-2024 Nations League. This is, again, like we were talking about before, an absolutely massive opportunity. And I honestly think that them not just qualifying for this tournament, but them doing well could be one of the most important national team developments that they've ever had. More bigger than making the World Cup, bigger than hosting a World Cup, them doing well, not just showing up and doing all right, then getting bounced, but actually competing, making the knockout phases, and putting some of the best teams in South America on notice and maybe giving them a bit of a hard time would be incredible. Also, just seeing, because apparently Lionel Messi has no intention to retire, so should we see some Canadian players share a field with the greatest player of all time would be kind of surreal, right? Or even against Brazil, them sharing the field with the likes of Neymar and the likes of Gabriel Jesus, who's having a great season at Arsenal, would be kind of surreal and kind of incredible, right? Just watch them play against Luka Modric and Kevin De Bruyne and all these players was fun, but watch them play against the greatest players ever would be
wild.
insane. And also can't wait to see how a Canadian backline deals with someone like Lionel Messi, which is probably just something that I don't think any of those guys would
Oh
ever in
God.
the wildest dream think they'd have to prepare for.
I take it back. I don't know if I want to see that. Oh,
I have faith. I have
but
faith.
well, that's good for you. There you go. Okay, you're not in good company with pessimistic Eve then. I'll rep the fear. I'll rep the fear for the podcast. No worries.
That sounds good.
Alrighty, let's move on to our next tweet.
That's one. Yes. All right. This is translated from Fresh from Ali K. MLS start to 2022. Why do we give academy players the opportunity they deserve to be showcased? But in 2023, we want to replace the departures with the players from the academy. I don't trust the current squad. So it does kind of show that there's this change in mentality between
Hmm.
last year and this year, which I do find very interesting because last year, it was all about give the youngsters a chance, right? And then you see people like Ismail Kone kind of explode out of the gate. But the second we sell these players and bring in more academy players, it's like, oh, we're not good enough. Well, and I've seen this all over the place and kind of pointing out that almost double standard is very important because you have to kind of understand that it may be that not every single one of these players is going to be Ismail Kone and have an incredible season and get sold for a couple million to a club that's most likely going to play in the Premier League next season. But what it does show is that there is a conveyor belt of talent coming through the academy and coming through the youth ranks of this club that deserve at the very least the benefit of the doubt, if not, your but anywhere from the benefit of doubt to unbridled support, depending on how good and how promising they are. But there is a lot of very good talent coming to this team, and like I said about the scrimmage, if they all grow up and develop under this common identity that the club is trying to purvey through every level of its academy, they're only going to have that much of an easier time integrating into the team. So if you have players and you model them after, I need an Alistair Johnston type, I need a Victor Wanyama type at the academy from the very beginning, then they're going to come into this team and slide in and have no difficulty, integrating themselves into both the culture and the tactical lineup. So I think that the young the kids are all right, and I think that they'll have a pretty easy time integrating into the system. And I think that a lot of the pessimism, sorry, Eve, but a lot of the pessimism is a little unwarranted, So
Fair enough.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can still be pessimistic about Lionel Messi and
Yes,
and the
yes,
Canadian national team backline. Yeah, no, I agree, and
absolutely.
yeah, no, and you do raise a good point, or as did Ali. A good point that, and as well we do, because we want to allow the young players a chance to show what they're made of. We do also need to be prepared to bear
Mhm.
with some growing pains.
Yeah,
One bad game does not a bad player make. So I think we do just
exactly.
need to be mindful and adjust our standards appropriately. Next tweet.
Yes, this one is from Amin, who had a tweet earlier, but it all depends. This is about a potential trade for Kamal Miller and bringing in someone attacking, right? So it all depends on the return. If you can get, let's say, a Chicho Arango for Miller and Gam, I think it would be a no-brainer for CF Montreal. Miller has a word to say for a team if he is sold in Europe, but not in the case of a trade in MLS. So that is true that if they were to want to trade Kamal Miller, that's not really something that they need
Mhm.
to discuss with him. Um, my biggest issue with trading someone like Kamal Miller within the MLS, and I did reply what I'm saying
Mhm.
to his tweet, is the fact that Kamal Miller is as good as going to Europe as any other player in MLS at this point.
Yeah.
And the fact that you are and his stock is only going to improve, right? This is as if you're keeping someone like Alistair Johnson for an extra year where they're going to get that much better. You're going to have that much more exposure because he will be the first name on the team sheet every time, unless Hernando wants to rotate the squad or there's some kind of, rest at play. He's always going to start. And so his value is only going to go up. So if you're going to trade Kamal Miller to someone else in the MLS team, you need to attach a massive sell on clause because
Oh yeah.
you're giving him away and you're not taking a sizable chunk of that transfer fee when he leaves for Europe. You are basically
You got
flushing
robbed.
a couple million
Yeah.
down the drain. We're getting absolutely daylight robbery, right? So if you do trade him within the MLS to shore up some other spots, and that's a huge if, you need to see some of that money when he leaves for Europe, because or else, like you said, highway robbery.
Right on.
Yeah.
Couldn't have said it better myself. Perfect. Next tweet.
Yeah, so this is from Milton, who did really good work and honestly a whole lot of data. And this is why I got into journalism, to stay away from the math. But according to my calculation, this is translated from French again. According to my calculations, there could be around $500,000 worth of space left under the salary cap. On the other hand, the club could use another 1.5 million from GAM, and there's also 3 senior places and 3 international spaces. So this is kind of like we talked about with Joaquin Torres leaving and taking an international space. I don't know if they'll go necessarily for an international player, but what
Mhm.
all this room does, like we spoke about before, is it gives them so many more options and such a wider window, such a larger window to kind of find the player they want and find the right fit if they were to bring in someone new. And they don't have their resources are limited to, I have to specifically find an MLS player, I have to specifically find XYZ that fits all these criteria. They don't have to jump through all these hoops. they have such a they have such a wide variety of options now, which means that they can really take their time and do this right instead of kind of being forced to pick somebody because I don't have the depth I want at this position, but I only have so much money, and I have to kind of like MacGyver somehow make a trade happen, and I have to give up pieces I don't want to give up. No, they are in the driver's seat in terms of bringing in players, which is something
Yep.
that is kind of rare for the club, where they kind of have
Mhm.
the ability to go and nitpick exactly who they want to get it just right. So that is very good, but it's also kind of a double-edged sword because if you do get it wrong, you have no excuse. You
Yeah.
were not backed into a corner. You have every resource at your disposal, and you don't have to give, or you have to give very little up to make it happen. So if Olivier Renard goes on to get somebody and it kind of falls on his face, he's left holding the bag, and that could maybe be a little bit intimidating. But I
Yeah.
think that he's going to enjoy all this kind of freedom that he's going to have with bringing someone new in.
Yeah, exactly. Obviously, like we did see, for example, Bjorn Johnson. I think that one did blow up.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, but
So
within MLS, they've definitely they've knocked their trades out of the park so far. So
yeah,
I would just assume we recruit within MLS. Stick with what works. If
they,
it
have, they
ain't
haven't
broke,
missed
don't
so
fix it.
far. They haven't missed so far.
Exactly.
Exactly.
Knock on wood. Knock on wood. I don't have anything made of real wood near me, alas. Oh, there we go. I do. I thought something. There we go. Perfect. All right. And our final tweet.
Yes. So this is this is in response to
Oh
the
yeah.
new Toronto keeper
Some
Sean
other
Johnson,
clubs.
new some other clubs, new keeper who will remain nameless, referring to him, well, the club referring to him as the Minister of Defense. In reality, no, there is only one Minister of Defense in Canada, and that's Stephanie Labbe. I would say more. I would more so say the Ministry of Buffoonery. I don't think this is a knock against Sean Johnson. I think this is more a knock against the club that will remain nameless. And you
Yeah.
should know better than to
Yeah.
disparage one of our national heroes and greatest treasures. So I think that that's an appropriate response.
Yeah.
I think that everybody kind of reacted the same way when the second they saw Minister of Defense, because you have to be careful with that title that is spoken for. So
Yeah.
I think it was
Yeah,
only Toronto would do
exactly.
something like that. I mean, the club
Exactly.
that we will not name.
No, it's all good. It's all good. It's all good. No, I gotta say, I was scratching my head a little bit when I saw that tweet pass on my timeline myself. And we saw the minister herself actually, replied to it and was like, "Oh, hey," and several other kind of, I guess, prominent, if you will, fixtures within soccer did as well. So they've left the tweet up, but maybe they could have. Maybe they're like having a little bit of regret right now, a little bit of oops. We should
Yeah,
we should have picked some other defensive fancy title or not. Who knows? It's Toronto. You never know.
it's Toronto.
Exactly. So anyway, that does wrap up our episode for this evening. Thank you so much for joining me, Elias, and sharing everything that you have observed and learned and taken in. Um, so for anybody who wants to follow up on what CF Montreal will be up to this week, do follow Elias. He will be very active, I think, on Twitter as he often is at
I will be.
training. So make sure to give him a follow, and of course, we'll retweet as well on our own account. Thank you to everybody who listened, who left a comment. Thanks so much. Always appreciate that. And if you listen through the week, appreciate you just as much. Of course, we have begun a Patreon. Our content is always going to remain free for everybody to listen to. However, if you want to support our efforts and help us make the podcast evolve and become even higher quality, then do feel free to support our Patreon. And we are beyond grateful for everyone who does choose to do that. Can't say thank you enough. So with that being said, I will wish all of you a great rest of your evening, a wonderful week, and hopefully an exciting week of preseason with, who knows, maybe some new faces.
It's gonna be awesome. I can't wait. So
Excellent.